Hey, welcome back. I'm the book guy. Guys, I wasn't gonna do a Wind and Truth video. Well, for two reasons. Because everyone was doing one, right? Every other booktuber was gonna do a Wind and Truth video. I didn't want to just flood the market with that stuff. But the second reason is because I don't really chase clickbait on my channel. I don't do new releases or current trends. I don't care about that sort of stuff. But for the last month and a half, I've been getting comments all the time, like almost every day. Someone be like, hey, when's your Wind and Truth video coming out? I want to hear what you have to say. And it's really nice that people care about my opinion. That's a good feeling. Because let's be honest, there has been a bit of a backlash to Wind and Truth. A rather vocal group of readers who had a more negative reaction to it. I was not one of those negative people. I felt like when I went and saw The Phantom Menace as a kid and had a great time, and then when I went out and saw reviews, it turns out everyone else hated it, and I was like, what happened? Did I miss something? I apologize for comparing it to The Phantom Menace. That's an unfortunate comparison. Let me tell you, on the 6th of December when Wind and Truth came out, I was at the bookstore at 11 o'clock in the morning and I got that big copy up there and I started reading. At 6 p.m. in the evening, my Audible pre-order finally came through and I started listening to it as well. And I went back and forth between the physical book and the audiobook. When my eyes got tired, I switched to my ears, or when my ears got tired, I switched to my eyes. I stopped for 6 hours to sleep, and then I stopped to take my wife on a date on the Saturday morning because she's like, we need more romance. And I'm like, this couldn't possibly come at a more inopportune time. No, I'm kidding. She was great.
I am your wife. I'm the greatest good you are ever gonna get.
And then in the evening, I stopped for an hour because my brain was full, but I kept going. At 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday the 8th, I started listening and reading at the same time for the final 200 pages and finished sometime at about 3 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, this book took me like 36 to 40 hours. Had a great time, moved on with my life. But yeah, everyone else... Why has there been a bit of a negative reaction? Is it in any way justified? Kind of. I do think it's a bit of an overreaction, but there are some points. So what I'm going to do for this video, first of all, it is unscripted, in case you haven't guessed already. But what we're going to do for this video today is we're going to make the first half of it non-spoiler. Because I know there's probably a bunch of you who haven't read the book yet and are kind of put off by some of the more negative vocal reactions you've heard from other people. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover that so you can decide for yourself if you want to read this book. And then we'll do full spoilers in the later half and get a bit more specific. But we'll clarify just what went right with this book, what went wrong. We'll try to be a bit objective about it. I'll let you know, though, I had a great time. I had no significant problems with this book, but I definitely can see why other people would have, and we're gonna explore that today. Let's begin. So, non-spoilers. The first thing I noticed about this book is that it's got the 10 days. Okay, so we got, in 10 days time, we're going to have a contest of champions that will decide the fate of Roshar and the greater Cosmere on a whole. So we've got a 10-day countdown. Now, I was concerned going into this book that we were going to basically spend 10 days waiting for the Sanderlanche at the end. But that's not true. Actually, a whole bunch of stuff happens in the meantime, and new plots and new threats are introduced. And it's all relevant. It doesn't feel like, oh, now we're just going to create some filler, some sidetracks before we actually get to the main deal. But avoiding spoilers, I'd say that the way that we spend our 10 days was a really good way to make this book interesting and unique. A lot of people have complained about the length. So it was over 1,300 pages. I think it's like 1,360 pages. So it's big. It's definitely the biggest one. This book is bigger than War and Peace, which I've also read. One of the things I found is that people like me who read this book in a very short amount of time really enjoyed it. But a lot of people spent weeks reading this book, and those tend to be the people who had the more negative reactions. It's a curious thing. It's almost as if this book needs to be read quickly, and the longer you spend on it, the longer the plot feels. It's a strange thing. This book also splits up all of our characters. So it starts with them all sort of together, but they very much all deviate and go in different directions. So because of that, there's a lot of plot lines happening that are very separate to each other, and a lot of character arcs that are disconnected. You know, like that one's happening over there, that one's happening over there. You know, it's all over the place. And I personally thought that they were blended well together, but it is just a very large number of plot lines and a large number of subplots all happening at the same time. There is a lot of skipping back and forth, which some people said has contributed to pacing issues. I can kind of see that. Again, I didn't think that this was a big issue, but I can see how other people would. One of the issues with this pacing is that we'll often get a climactic scene and then a cutaway to someone else. that's a bit frustrating. I think a lot of people would prefer to have, if we've got two characters having scenes at the same time, just give us 10 pages of that character and then 10 pages of that character, rather than two here, two here, two here, two here. Just give us it in dumps so we can just focus on something. That's always more enjoyable. There is a little bit of over-skipping in this one, I'll definitely admit that. One of the other issues you get in a big story like this, where there are lots of plot lines all happening at once, is you get readers who only care about these 2 plot lines and then don't care about these 5 plot lines. And there's a certain amount of prioritizing of those, and frustration every time you have to skip away from it. I definitely concede that as well. There were a couple of plot lines where I was like, I'm not even sure why this is happening, because it doesn't seem quite as important. It all ends up being important, you know, in typical Sanderson fashion. So even the seemingly irrelevant things are suddenly jarringly a shocking twist. It was really cool. This book also spends a lot of time exploring the past. Some people have taken issue with that. The segments where we're exploring the past, some people have said, oh, it's like that doesn't really matter to the present, but I felt like it did. There was a very clear reason why we were doing it. There was a goal in mind at the whole time. Plus, I felt as though exploring the past finally revealed a lot of the great mythos and mysteries of the ancient worlds. For me, the entire past sequence was a highlight of the whole book, because it was a massive reward to the readers who've spent 5,000 pages thus far with this series, and now we finally understand all these gaps. Some people have called it info dumping. I strongly disagree with that. It was a massive reward, and there was a mystery element to it as well. Plus, it really had consequences. It really had consequences with the present. So what happened in the past affected the present, and we need to know because it solves the mystery that will change the future. I thought it had perfectly set up, you know, relevance to the entire greater plot. So I can't really vouch for people's problem with that one. I guess it's just another case of, oh, we want to get back to the primary plot line. Why are we doing all these subplots? But I personally thought all the past stuff was a real highlight. And honestly, one of the biggest rewards for me of reading this book was to finally understand all the ancient truths as well. Another big issue that people have just pointed out is the length. So yes, it is a very long book. A lot of people say they wish it was shorter. A few have accused Sanderson of being self-indulgent, or maybe he's too big of an author now that his editor dare not challenge him and he just writes whatever he wants. This was a really baffling criticism to me, because I wholeheartedly think that every plotline in here was very tight and very direct and to the point. In fact, I would say that one of the biggest issues with Rhythm of War, which I've talked about elsewhere, was that it was long. It was too long, and that we often went into waiting mode because we were waiting for things to just happen. We're like, okay, when's that Sanderlanche coming? You know? Because one of the disadvantages of doing a big Sanderlanche thing at the end is it often means we're just waiting for a big chunk of the book, waiting for that. It's why in, for example, Words of Radiance, there's lots of significant events leading up to it, so it doesn't feel like we're just waiting for the Sanderlanche. The Sanderlanche is there, and it's still good, but there's plenty happening in the meantime. Rhythm of War didn't quite have that. It did feel like we were waiting. I felt like Wind and Truth had something happening constantly. And again, this might be a result of me reading it in less than 2 days. There was also an incredible amount of foreshadowing, because there are some big twists coming up at the end of this. That is not a spoiler. It's a Sanderson novel. We know this about the guy. So a lot of what's happening in the meantime is setting up things that ended up being relevant in the end. I'm totally okay with that. I think that all works and is connected. Is it too long? Possibly. But I think it's more of a case of he left too many things unresolved in the fourth book, and he should have put some of those plot lines in the fourth book if he could have figured out a way. And by the time we get to book 5, it's like, oh, now we're scrambling a little bit. But yeah, I did see a couple of reviewers be like, oh, he should have cut like 500 pages from this book. I honestly cannot figure out how or where or what could have been cut, because it was all relevant in the end. I'm just absolutely floored by that assessment. Other reviewers have talked about juvenile writing or bad writing, that it feels like a YA book. And I definitely do see that is there a little bit. I think when you are a big author and people read your book, there can be a certain, oh, that'll do, that's a good enough line, or I'm sure they'll appreciate what I'm doing here. But there was a couple of instances, and I'm going to use one in specific, I hope you don't mind. Hoyd, at one point, refers to Kaladin and calls him a therapist. And Kaladin's like, I don't even know what a therapist is, right? And that on its own is a decent joke. You know, it's like, oh, it's Hoyd. Hoyd knows all sorts about stuff about the wider universe. It's okay for him to use terminology that's outside of Roshar. But then Kaladin takes the word therapist and continues to use it throughout the book. And every time it pops up, it can break the immersion in the fantasy world. I mean, imagine if you were in Lord of the Rings and Samwise randomly says, after we destroy the ring, Mr. Frodo, we're going to go to university and get our degrees in psychiatry, and we're going to open up a practice. Like, it would just break the immersion a little bit too much. Personally, this didn't affect me because I actually rather like meta humor. I like Deadpool and stuff that breaks the fourth wall. I'm totally okay with that. But it is a little bit weird when you're creating a high fantasy world. If you were to do urban fantasy like the Dresden Files, that sort of thing would be a lot more applicable. But there are times in this book where there are real-world references, like the therapist thing, and it is a bit jarring, and you gotta wonder why it was there. If you're going to commit to writing a high fantasy story, you got to commit to the full immersion of it. And it's a bit distracting every time you get a real-world reference. That said, I think one of the biggest issues people have with the ending. It's the end! Now, I am keeping this non-spoilers, but I have to warn you, this is an open ending. It's not a hard conclusion. It's very open. That's all I'm going to say about it, and I won't say any specifics until the next segment, but this was a huge shock, especially to me. And I got to be honest, not in a million years would I have done this personally. Like, if I was writing my series, I would never get to an endpoint and be like, plot twist, it's super open, and now you're going to have to wait 8 years while I go and write some other books, and then I'll come back to it and continue. I mean, imagine if George R. Martin got to the end of Song of Ice and Fire and actually succeeded in writing A Dream of Spring, and then boom, he's like, by the way, this is the halfway mark. God, there'd be riots, wouldn't there? We'd just fume. Now, if Brandon Sanderson does that, we've got, yeah, obviously there's a much higher chance that he's actually going to commit to it. But he's asking us to trust him. And I don't think we've got that kind of relationship just yet.
We're keeping things casual.
Casual?
You see, Brandon Sanderson is the type of author who always holds the hand of his reader. Right? So if we're talking about having a very hands-off approach like Malazan, which requires trust from their readership, that would make sense. And Brandon is on very much the other extreme, where he over-explains everything, where he's very clear with all of his descriptions, and he makes sure no one gets lost at any point. And if there's ever anything slightly tricky, he'll really delve into it to make sure no one gets lost. This is one of the reasons why he's a very popular author and has a lot of readers, because he is easy to read. And he doesn't require a lot of trust. But now he's asking for a lot of trust all at once. He's suddenly not holding the hand of the reader, he's throwing them in the deep end. It's like, you gotta trust me, I'll come back in 8 years and I'll definitely make it worth your while. He hasn't established that sort of relationship just yet. The concept of leaving the end of an era so open, I don't think it's a bad writing decision, but I think it's an unwise career decision. I think that's a very important distinction. I do think that a lot of the fandom will turn on him at this point because of cliffhanger fatigue. So if you've ever watched The Walking Dead, I was a huge Walking Dead fan back in the early days of it. I watched every episode the evening it came out. I was right there on the TV every time. But then I stopped around the time everyone else did, at this scene. For the simple fact that I was sick of cliffhangers. If you're writing a story that's all about surviving, you can't keep the risk of death so present in your mind for so long without exhausting your audience, right? Which is why a lot of people turned off. This is yet another cliffhanger, and Stormlight has been filled with cliffhangers since day one. Book 1 ends with the revelation of, the Voidbringers are actually the Parshmen, and they're all around us all along. And, Talon the Herald coming back and being like, they're coming. And then book 2 ends with the Everstorm beginning, and book 3 ends with war breaking out, and book 4 ends with the Contest of Champions, and every time it's a bigger cliffhanger. And now we've got book 5, and we've probably got the biggest cliffhanger of all. And people are just like, oh, come on, another cliffhanger? Can't you end it, ever? We want the satisfaction of, we've made some sort of progress, right? No, it's all journey before destination. And we're like, can't we have one destination? Surely by this point? So I will admit, that was probably the most shocking part of this, just how open the ending of it was. And again, never in a million years would I do something like that with my own writing, but, there it is. He's asking us to trust us, that's entirely up to you, and I think it's kind of fair if people choose not to trust him at this point. The other thing I'll say to this is very similar to Star Wars. When the first Star Wars movie came out, a lot of people were like, wow, George Lucas is a genius. And then the second one came out and people were like, oh, it's too dark and it's too different and we don't like it anymore. And then the third one came out and like, oh, the Ewoks are stupid, and the whole Jabba and the Hutt sequence was stupid as well. And then the Phantom Menace came out and people were like, oh, this is the worst movie ever. And every step of the way, people just complained, right? And part of the reason for that is because people loved Star Wars so much. They loved it so much, they thought that it belonged to them. And every time it didn't do what they thought it should do, they got really angry at the creator. And eventually the creator got sick of people being ungrateful and just sold the damn thing. Honestly, one of the things I really admire about George Lucas, just as an aside here, is that despite the amount of crap he's put up with from an ungrateful fandom, he's never stooped to that level. He's always acted honorably and graciously. He's always been a kind person. And yeah, the movies definitely have flaws, especially the prequels, but he's handled it well, and I really do respect that. But I think we're seeing a similar thing happen with the Stormlight fandom. People love Stormlight. They're like, I've been here since the beginning. I've reviewed it on my channel. I've told people about it. I've advocated for the series. And now it's not doing what I think it should do. And I hate it now. And how could Brandon do this? I get it. But at the same time, we got to remember that the story never belonged to us. You know, in many ways. It's always been Brandon's vision. And he's going to do what he's going to do. I'd encourage you to sort of show a bit of restraint and not be too entitled. Remember that books are going to do whatever the author's vision is. And if you don't like it, you should probably write your own book. And I'm actually not saying that to be vindictive. If you can't find the perfect book, it's probably because you haven't written a book that perfectly fits your taste yet. Just throwing that out there. I do think this book has also shown a bit of an issue where Brandon is clearly, I would say he's more focused on his vision of the series than necessarily connecting with the audience. And there has become a bit of a disconnect. So remember, in case you haven't followed, he's finished this book. He's going to go and write the Ghostbloods and the Elantris series for a little while, and he'll come back to this in about 5 or 6 years, and then take 2 more years to write it, sort of thing. We're looking at an 8-year time gap at least. And I think he's very set in this is what my vision is, but it's not necessarily what the audience wants at this point. It's tricky. And I think he's going to fail in many sense. I think he's going to fail at balancing what his vision is and what the audience wants. Because the bigger you get and the more strong and distinctive your tastes are as a writer, the more likely it is you're going to lose people. Hey, I'm outside now. I know it's random, but there's a really nice sunset. Hey, how good is that? Anyway, before I move on to the spoiler section, I've got to add something. One of the things people have talked about with this series is that this book now includes a gay romance, which, big tick from me. I'm always happy to see that. Of course, some people naturally complain about it, because society. But for the most part, I actually think it's a really good thing. I did think some of the interactions between the two gay guys was a little bit... It was clearly a straight guy trying to write how gay guys write, and that's not quite, how it works. Some people have said, oh, it's shoehorned in, because there hasn't been anything like that up until this point, and he's trying to over-represent because of how little there's been beforehand, and I don't think that's true either, because there has been gay guys since book 2, actually. I know there's a scene in the... where the bridge crew are sitting down and talking together. Sorry for all the birds, it's Australia. There's a scene where all the bridge crew are sitting down and talking together, and one says that he's gay, and he says he didn't tell anyone because he was worried people wouldn't think he was masculine. And the other character's like, what? You're so masculine. In fact, you're more masculine than us because you like men that much. Which is such a dumb but sweet thing to say. I'm like, yep, that's how men would talk to each other, but that's been there since book 2, and I forget the character's name, but I know that he gets married to a man in book 4. Again, that one's got full points from me. But I'll move on from that. Let's get into actual spoilers here. So from this point onwards, we're going to talk spoilers and we're going to talk specifics. So the first thing I really liked about this is the fact that Odium cheats. And that, Taravangian, he finds that there's a loophole in the contract, and that if he seizes territory in the next 10 days, he gets to keep it during the stalemate. And I think that's a brilliant decision. As soon as I realized where this was going, I was like, oh, that's fantastic. It means we're not sitting around waiting for 10 days. We are in a desperate, on-the-clock battle where we've got everything in the balance, where Taravangian could quite literally conquer the world in the next 10 days. So even though we've got the Contest of Champions, we have threat number 2. And I genuinely thought that this was fantastic. The second thing that I really liked was the revelation that that Honor's power may still be out there. I thought that was a great way to up the stakes, where Dalinar is now chasing this power by going through the spiritual realm and trying to figure out the past and figure out where the power is. This is why I said in the earlier segment that the whole exploring the past wasn't just an info dump. There was a very clear goal set up the whole time, and as I've talked about elsewhere, especially in my Words of Radiance video, goals are so important. You can't just have random stuff happening. You can't just have flashbacks. You have to know why it's there and what it's striving for. And there was a very clear goal the whole time. So even though someone like me, who's a super nerd who loved all the mythos of the ancient world, there was true relevance there. And I thought it was very well set up. So frankly, people who called it an info dump are just wrong, okay? Just throwing that out there. The fact that we have a military campaign with the fate of the world, the contest of champions looming, and Dalinar's desperate search for the power of honor was fantastic. I thought that these were 3 very compelling things driving this forward and definitely building and escalating to a climax. So it wasn't a case of waiting for the climax and the Sanderlanche. There was plenty going on in the meantime with a huge risk and a ticking clock factor. Brilliant. I full-heartedly enjoyed that. If there was a plot line that I was worried about its relevance, it would have to be Kaladin and Szeth in Shinovar. Now, I will say, Szeth's flashbacks are some of the best in the whole series. This was fantastic. Another flawless plotline, and I don't think anyone's actually complained about this one. I think it's also very clear that Sanderson had this plotline in mind, more or less, from the very beginning. And because I read all 4 of these books leading up to reading Wind and Truth, and I had remembered Szeth's character in the very first book, I was like, oh, this links up so well, so tightly, and I thought it was expertly done. That said, as good as it was to have the plot in Shinovar, where Szeth is exploring the world of his childhood at the same time, and there was such emotional depth there, I also felt like the plot line of going from temple to temple and fighting each of the people with the honor blades was nowhere near as high stakes. In fact, that one felt more like filler than anything else, and I was struggling to understand why it was relevant. Now, I will say in the epigraphs of day 1, there were the little lines at the top of each chapter. There's a little forewarning that the segment with Kaladin and Szeth was just as important, if not more so. All right, so there's sort of like an out-of-world reason saying that this will be relevant, but in the present, it wasn't really clear why. Now, I know the whole thing is like, oh, you got to find the Herald Isha, and maybe he'll have an answer, but that was a very vague, compelling reason to be in the area. It turned out to be relevant because they saved the Spren, and they reunited the Heralds, which was a big deal. But for most of that plotline, the goal wasn't clear enough, and that one did feel a little bit like, why are we here and what's going on? I will say I think Adolin's plotline was one of the surprise winners of the whole thing, that him being a commander on the front line of the battle, but also having to take that step back where he's no longer the soldier who's trying to win glory on the battlefield. He has to be removed and order his troops. Was a great example of him. I've always felt like Adolin was struggling for relevance in this series, and the series definitely called attention to that many times. Like, he's a great friend to the other characters, and he's a great husband to Shallan. Every time he does a great husband thing, I'm like, game recognized game. That guy really nailed the supporting spouse. Love to see it. But for most of the plot, I was just like, why do we still have, knights in armor when we've got knights radiance? Like, it seems like such a weird deviation, but no, he really came through in this one. I think some people have said that was a long plot line. I didn't think so. The way he sits with the Azith Emperor and teaches him that board game of strategy was, it was a great, I thought, good fulfillment of the Azith Emperor plotline as well in his character arc, but it also brilliantly foreshadowed Dalinar's strategy in his ultimate plotline as well. We'll come back to Adolin in a second. With Dalinar, though, his plotline of searching for the power of honor, I thought it was brilliant to set up and finally explain why honor and cultivation didn't kick Odium's ass the first time he showed up. That was a big question in my mind, and it was very satisfying to see a result to that. But also, it was very clear now why Dalinar, even if he does find the power of honor, he can't just be like, boom, fight to the death, like Preservation and Ruin had done, some 20 years earlier. It was very clear that he couldn't do it without destroying Roshar, and he needed a third option. We'll come back to Daliner's ending in just a second when we talk about the ending on a whole. Shallan's plotline was a real highlight for me, because if you have been in the fandom for a while and you get really deep into all the lore, you'll know that the fans actually predicted Shallan's mother's reveal in this book. We predicted it years ago. The theory was that her mother was the Herald Shanarak. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was quite popular. A lot of people knew it. And Sanderson followed through and put it in the book anyway. And I was really happy to see that, because there's a bit of a push among some authors to always surprise your audience. And if the audience figures it out and sees your plot twist coming, then it's ruined and the whole book is ruined. Yeah, and they did that in Game of Thrones, especially towards the end there, where they were so determined to surprise everyone, they just started doing nonsensical things for the drama and the unpredictability of it. And it's like, why? This doesn't make any sense. But Sanderson committed to it, and he did the revelation even though some fans knew it. And that was a huge reward. I was very happy to see that. It's also great to finally see the culmination of Shallan's past and her mysteries and see that resolved. That was definitely one of the more satisfying moments of the whole series. It felt like all the time we've spent with Shallan up to that point was finally worth it, because we got unending. Kaladin's resolution, where he stands up to Ishar. Not to mention the whole fact that Ishar finally explains what's happening to the Heralds all along and why they have been so broken and under that curse, and Kaladin is the one to break it. That was a great resolution for his character. I do think it's hard for a lot of people to see Kaladin become so non-active from a violent perspective. I do think that this is subverting expectations in a very clever way. We are used to our action heroes remaining action heroes. We're not used to them getting PTSD and withdrawing from the front line. I liked it overall. There were times where I was like, oh, come on, Kaladin, can you fight just one more time? Join up with Zeth, It'd be really cool, but it doesn't really happen, and I appreciate it. I do think it's more mature storytelling for sure, but I do appreciate why it's so shocking and maybe not gelled quite as well. But I do think the resolution of that, of him being able to stand up under Ishar's weight of soul crushing, and him being like, dude, I've got depression, man. I am here every day. Come back when you're on my level. That was... I did enjoy that. Well, let's talk about endings now. Okay, so now, God, with the ending... You know what? So look, with the ending, I get it. I get what the author was aiming to do, but this was definitely the biggest upset. So Daliner dying, giving away the power of honor straight to Odium so he becomes twice as powerful, and therefore the rest of the Cosmere has to unite against him, making him a threat too great to ignore any longer. That was brilliant and quite sophisticated. I thought it was a very clever and nuanced resolution to that. Odium now has to act with honor, and he's bound by laws was a good way to put constrictions on him that will make him more interesting. The fact that the Herald plotline finally comes together at that point was well done. But again, that plotline, you were like, why is it relevant? And only at that point did you actually understand, okay, maybe it is relevant. Okay, but the big issue with the ending is the fact that it's very clearly unresolved. It's not a cliffhanger in the sense of it being an urgent, imminent death, right? But everyone is in an unresolved place. This is what I find so curious about it. Because, let's say, for just hypothetical discussion here, let's say there were 10 plot lines in Wind and Truth, because 10 symmetry, I know. But let's say there were 10, and the primary one was unresolved, or maybe the secondary one was unresolved, but then the other 8 were wrapped up in a neat little package. Well, that'd be great. No one would have any problems with that. But it's the fact that he very systematically made sure that all 10 plot lines were unresolved, just to make sure you knew for a fact that it was deliberate, and he's definitely going in this direction. That was almost offensive, and by far the most frustrating part of this for me. And again, I never would have done this as an author, not in a million years would I make it so unresolved and be like, by the way, everyone, if you wait 8 years, it'll definitely be worth it. I'd never do that to my audience. I don't understand. And I do think that he left too many things unresolved. So, like, for example, Adeline. Adeline has his leg cut off, and he's like, wow, maybe Stormlight will regrow it. Plot twist, there's no more Stormlight. Also, he's trapped in a new country away from his home, and he's trapped away from his wife. So his plotline is almost punishingly unresolved. Like, it's gone out of his way to make it as inconvenient for him as possible. And Shallan being trapped in Shadesmar, like, I get that the two of them have the Sion that they can talk with. That's a nice little touch. But she's so unresolved. You know, her character arc is resolved, but her situation's terrible. The fact that Navani is asleep in a stone thing. The fact that Yasna and Renarin are like, great, now we got to clean up and prepare. Also, we're definitely kings in exile, and we've lost, Alethi, Elithkar forever. The fact that Kaladin is trapped away with the heralds, and everyone is left in purgatory for the next 8 to 10 years. And I can't imagine why he'd commit to it that way. Like I said, if he'd made, if he'd made everyone happy, but made the situation with Taravangian bad, if Dalinar died, gave the power of honor over to Taravangian, and he's paused for 10 years, but everyone else is doing great in the meantime, that would have been perfectly fine. I think everyone would be really happy with that. But the fact that it's every single plotline is unresolved is a bit much. And again, I don't think Sanderson has established the trust with his audience to really justify such an open ending like that. Well, I think that's about all I had to get off my chest here. I'm sure there'll be more because I'm doing this unscripted. I'll probably interject with a video at some point. Speak of the devil, here I am. I'm back outside again, and I'm holding the camera up so you don't see how messy the ground is underneath me, but well, let's talk about lawn maintenance another time. One other thing I got to mention is the contest of champions. Now, some people found it to be really anticlimactic because it didn't come down to a big fight. I think a lot of us were hoping for a big fight. Personally, I did like the fact, I appreciate what Sanderson was doing. I liked the fact that it wasn't a contest of swords, it was a contest of beliefs. That Dalinar's challenge, will you kill one person to save the many? Which is what Taravangian has been saying they should have done all along. I liked that it came down to a theme, because there was no way we could write a one-on-one contest that was going to be good enough for everyone. I liked that it came down to Taravangian say it's a choice. And Taravangian even freezing Galavar, whatever his name is, to make sure it was obvious that it was a choice. I liked it. But at the same time, it could have been done better, because I do think there was always going to be some people who wanted it to be a fist fight, and the fact that it wasn't is going to upset some people. So I think a midway point would have been better. One of my examples, this is a bit of a spoiler for Wheel of Time, but I always liked the fight at the end of Wheel of Time between Lan and Demandred, because that wasn't a fight. It wasn't about who was the better swordsman, it was about who was willing to make a sacrifice. Because one of the Forsaken would never make a sacrifice to save his friends, but Lan would. And that was a much better way to incorporate a fight, but that's still about the decision and the beliefs. Where making it all about the beliefs didn't quite work as well. I also going to mention, I didn't like the way that Dalinar died, because he walks off, and in the next section, the heralds mention that he died, in the next section, someone finds his body. I'm like, that was random? Why didn't we just get a clear description of it? That was frustrating. Overall, I still think that him dying at that point was a good decision and a good culmination of his character, but the actual delivery of it was weird. But I think that's all I've got. Now, I don't like rating books, as I've mentioned plenty of times, because they're works of art. A lot of people have given these ratings. I'd give this 8 out of 10, personally. Yeah, no, I don't think it deserves the extreme negative reaction I think it's got. I do think the fact that there are a couple of real-world references, a couple of YA type of language used from time to time rather than the big epic fantasy we've had so far, yeah, that's not great, and the very open ending is rough to handle. I definitely think that. But I don't think it's deserved such a strong negative reaction from other people. That is my opinion. So you can take that or leave that. I hope that sort of answers the questions a lot of you guys have been having about it. Still, let me know your thoughts on Wind and Truth below. Now, I'll just do some channel updates. My books are available, but it's a little bit weird at the moment. It's a whole thing. Book 1 is available on Amazon, but Book 2 is not available, and Book 3 is available, but with the wrong price. Also, the ebooks are only available on Kobo, not Amazon. It's a whole thing. But you know how Amazon offers like publish exclusively with Amazon and we help indie authors? No, they don't. They punish indie authors pretty aggressively if you don't go exclusively, which I refuse to do. So we're still setting it up. We're still trying to get our contacts working. It's unfortunately just like a waiting game, and apparently it's also pretty normal. But anyway, the books are coming out. Kind of. All the ebooks are available. I just thought I'd drop that little update on what I've been working on at the moment. I'll also let you know, I'll get back to my regular schedule in just a little bit. I've been sick for about 2 weeks. I've only just come out of it yesterday-ish, which if I seem a little bit grumpier today and unshaven, it's because I've been bedridden for a while, which hasn't been great. But I'll get back to our regular schedule very shortly, and we'll do Joe Abercrombie's Shattered Sea and the Illuminae Files. I should let you know as well, in February we're going to do a Malzahn month, which I'm so excited for. I've covered Malzahn Book of the Fallen, but there are something like 15 other Malzahn books out there in different series that all deserve your attention and are all just as good for different reasons, and I'm very excited to finally do some deep dives into them. And in March, we're going to be doing Middle Grade March, finally looking at some kids' books, like Skullduggery Pleasant. I talk about that one all the time, and it's never actually been a video. We're going to finally do it. And Percy Jackson, I need to do like a Percy Jackson Ultimate Guide. I'm so excited for that. But anyway, I'm going to go keep resting because I need more of a break. I hope that answers some questions you guys have got about Wind and Truth. If you want to support what I do, you can check out my shop, my Patreon, check out those books as they come available. Oh, and one other thing about my books, I just want to confirm, we've actually locked down who my audiobook narrator is going to be. We're just in the final steps of paying the invoice to get him started, and then we can announce it. I'll probably announce that just on Patreon, but that's very, very exciting. We are hoping to get my audiobooks out in June, so I'm so happy that one actually works. Thank you to everyone who backed the Kickstarter. We got there. We're going to get all 3 audiobooks done. Dream come true. I'm so excited for that. All right, you take it easy. I'm going to go take it easy, and I hope you enjoy reading a good book today, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye.